My contract stated that upon termination, all my company-paid certifications would be invalidated. My new freaky manager didn't realize the entire firm's operating license was tied to my name. When the boss returned from vacation, "Who the hell did we just fire?" "My name is Evelyn Brooks. I've been a nurse at St. Lucille's Medical Center for 23 years. Not a plaque, not a hallway photo, not even a signature on the staff recognition wall. Bears my name. But if you've ever walked into this hospital and didn't immediately feel chaos, you've felt my work. I started here when we still used paper charts and pages. I stayed when the ER got flooded during Hurricane Isabel, and we had to triage patients in the parking garage using clipboards wrapped in plastic bags. I stayed when our first digital charting system crashed for 12 hours, and I rebuilt the medication log from memory. I don't say that to brag. Most days, no one even asked how things stayed together. They just assumed someone took care of it, and I did in between tending wounds, comforting families, and covering shifts no one else wanted. That's the kind of nurse I am. Quiet but consistent, not flashy, not loud, just present. Then came Brad. Fresh off a corporate management degree, no clinical background, teeth so white they looked bleached by strategy memos, and a handshake that screamed startup energy. He was brought in as the new director of patient systems. That's a fancy way of saying he was here to fix things that weren't broken. I met him during his first staff huddle. He clicked through a glossy PowerPoint filled with graphs, arrows, and phrases like integrated patient tracking and next-generation care efficiency. He didn't make eye contact with me. He did refer to the current nursing model as legacy-oriented and ripe for realignment. I've been called worse. But that word legacy, it stuck. It wasn't a compliment. It was a label. A polite way of saying outdated, like I was a rotary phone in a world of Bluetooth headsets. He started making changes fast. Shift logs went tablet only. Supply requests were rerouted through an app no one knew how to use. Code protocol charts disappeared from the walls, replaced by a QR code that led to a training video with stock music. The night staff struggled. The interns nodded along. And I kept answering the same questions I'd been answering for years, but this time from people holding iPads. One day I found a group of new hires gathered around the break room table laughing. They were scrolling through a screenshot of the old crash cart checklist I'd made years ago. They called it cute, said it looked like something from a nurse museum. I walked past without saying a word, but I felt the heat rise in my chest. I wasn't mad at them. They didn't know better. I was mad at the idea that something hand-built, tested in fire and chaos, could be dismissed with a smirk. Brad encouraged that thinking. Every memo had a tone. Every update chipped away at the system I'd quietly kept running. One afternoon, he referred to my shift as analog consistency during a department meeting. Like that was a weakness. A week later, I was reassigned to inventory oversight. That was the title. In practice, it meant managing the basement supply room and auditing glove orders. No conversation, no context. Just an email with a new schedule and a brief note about resource redistribution. I didn't push back. I packed my things. I carried my coffee mug and the binder I'd kept in my drawer since 2007. The one with handwritten notes on backup generator sequences, old emergency protocols, and my own color-coded revisions of the code blue procedure. I wasn't sure if anyone would ever care about it again, but I wasn't going to throw it away. People talk about legacy like it's something you leave behind. What they forget, Schultz, is that sometimes it's still breathing. It doesn't make headlines, it doesn't get hashtags, but it's in the bones of a place. It's the reason a rookie nurse knows where to find a spare oxygen mask when the system goes down. I knew what was happening. I could feel the shift under my feet, like a building being remodeled while you're still inside it. But I also knew something Brad didn't. Foundations aren't flashy. They don't need to be. They just need to hold. And I built this one with my bare hands over 2 decades of midnight shifts, forgotten emergencies, and quiet victories no chart ever recorded. Brad showed up with the energy of a man who thought every problem had a slogan. He introduced himself like he was selling a new app instead of managing a hospital wing. Fresh haircut, tighter suit than necessary, and a watch that probably cost more than our break room coffee machine. He called himself an efficiency consultant. I called him a PowerPoint with legs. From the moment he stepped into the staff room, he treated every long-serving nurse like an outdated device waiting to be recycled. He spoke in verbs that didn't mean anything. Synergize, streamline, realign. He printed a poster that said, "Modern Care, Modern Minds," and taped it over the emergency response board like it was a motivational quote. I watched him replace a color-coded triage map that had saved lives with a glossy laminated sheet no one had seen before. During his first week, he rearranged the nurse shift schedules using an algorithm he bragged about. Said it balanced energy flow and minimized role fatigue. In real life, it put our most experienced trauma nurse in outpatient care, while a first-year nurse handled the night shift ER. I asked who approved it. He smiled and said optimization doesn't need permission when it's based on data. He took away our analog crash cart log because it didn't fit the new model. Never mind, it had decades of notes on what breaks, how fast it breaks, and who to call when it does. He replaced it with a digital inventory app that crashed during a real code blue because it tried to update mid-usage. He didn't see that happen. He was busy hosting a town hall in the cafeteria, talking about evolving away from dependency thinking. I stood in the back, arms crossed, counting how many times he said agile workflow before someone blinked. 12. He said it 12 times in one sentence. Brad liked to float phrases like digital-first safety culture. He asked us to stop using the term emergency drill and start calling it rapid readiness rehearsal. It made no sense. But no one challenged him out loud. Most were too tired, too polite, or too hopeful he'd fizzle out on his own. I didn't say much either. But every time he deleted a system I'd spent years refining, I added another page to my binder. He didn't notice the frustration building. He couldn't see the storm because he was too busy admiring his own weather app. The final straw for me wasn't the flashy tech or the condescending tone. It was the moment I realized he didn't know what Code Silver meant. He heard it once, raised his hand in a staff meeting, and asked if that was a billing level. That's when I knew he wasn't just misinformed. He was dangerous. And eventually someone was going to pay for it. The email came late on a Thursday. No subject line, just a calendar update and a new room number. I was reassigned to supply management effective immediately, no meeting, no warning, just a quiet demotion dressed as reallocation. The storage room was cold, always 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the building. It smelled like rubbing alcohol and unmarked cardboard, with shelves stacked floor to ceiling in no particular order. I spent my first hour there organizing syringes by gauge and wondering if anyone noticed I was gone. Brad's new emergency coordinator, a recent graduate named Haley, took over my old role. Bright eyes, new scrubs, and a voice that still asked permission to enter a room. She meant well. But meaning well doesn't count when lives are on the line. I heard her giving a rundown of the updated code protocol one morning. She read from a script, pausing at every abbreviation like it were written in another language. I stood in the hallway out of sight, listening to the silence that followed each mistake. No one corrected her. They didn't want to seem rude. But in the ER, silence costs time. She told the team the crash cart keys were in the drawer labeled Rapid Access. They used to be color-coded, tied to the drawer handle with surgical tape. She didn't know that. No one told her. Or maybe they did. She thought the new system was smarter. Brad praised her at the next department huddle, said she had a fresh perspective and was helping modernize outdated systems. I was standing behind a cart of saline bags when he said it. I didn't flinch. I just wrapped the tray tighter and marked it with a tag no one but me used anymore. In the storage room, I kept my own logs, handwritten, marked with dates, batch numbers, shelf shifts, and a quiet note when something went missing. I wasn't asked to do it, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. Gauze was restocked in the wrong bins. Expired vials are still on the upper shelves. Syringe sizes swapped without labels. I didn't report it. There wasn't a channel that would care. I just kept the notes. Folded them into the binder I carried with me, now the one that used to stay in my desk. Every time someone from upstairs called down to ask where we kept the crash cart batteries, I answered politely, then wrote it down. Being pushed out of the way doesn't mean you disappear. Sometimes it means you get a better view of how things fall apart. From that room in the basement, I saw every crack before it widened, and I knew sooner or later someone was going to trip. I just didn't know how loud the fall would be. It started with a call over the intercom that didn't sound right. The tone was off flat instead of urgent, like someone wasn't sure which button to press. I was 2 floors down, inventorying thermometers, when the voice came again. This time louder, but still uncertain. There was no color code, no room number, just a shaky voice asking for help in ICU room 7. That room wasn't on the current shift's rotation, which meant someone was filling in, or worse, someone panicked. I grabbed the old radio I kept on a side shelf and called upstairs, but got static. Then a second call. This one is from a nurse who barely masked the panic in her voice. She said the patient had coded, but the new alert system hadn't triggered. She didn't know how to override it. I didn't ask for permission. I ran. Up the stairs through the East Wing corridor, my badge flapping against my chest. I passed 2 techs arguing over a tablet login and didn't stop. When I reached ICU 7, I could hear the beeping. Fast, erratic, too fast. The patient was in V-fib body, convulsing the crash cart already wheeled in, but unopened. Haley stood at the bedside, frozen. Another nurse fumbled with the digital panel on the wall. The automated lock wasn't responding. The crash cart drawers had been programmed to open only with digital badge scans, and the system was still verifying authorization. There was no time for verification. I shoved past the cart, reached underneath, and flipped the manual release I'd installed years ago, but never told anyone about. The drawer clicked open. I grabbed the paddles, called out settings, and ordered gel. No one moved. I had to shout. The first shock came 30 seconds too late, but it was enough. The rhythm slowed, the second brought a pulse, the third stabilized it. Only then did the panic begin to drain from the room. I looked up and saw Brad at the doorway, arms crossed, speechless for once in his well-rehearsed life. No one said thank you. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was the kind of moment where breathing becomes the only sound, and you remember what urgency feels like. I stood over the patient and glanced at the touchscreen still flashing error. Haley walked up beside me, eyes wide, mouth open like she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. I didn't wait. I looked at her not unkindly and told her to write down every step I just took, not in the system, on paper. As I left the room, I passed Brad again. He looked like a man watching his blueprint unravel in real time. He opened his mouth but didn't speak. Maybe he was waiting for data. What he got instead was a reminder that sometimes saving a life doesn't come with a password. Back in the storage room, I sat down and added a new entry to the binder. ICU Room 7. Manual override successful. The cart drawer system failed. I wrote it all down, every second, every misstep, every fix. Then I underlined one sentence at the bottom. If they take the system apart, make sure they know where the wires go. After the incident in the ICU, a quiet investigation began. There were no public memos, no official statements, it's just a lot of people walking around with clipboards pretending they hadn't noticed the system failure. But I noticed the way they stopped calling the new system modern and started asking questions they used to ignore. A compliance officer from corporate showed up 2 days later. He asked where the manual override had been installed. Haley pointed at the crash cart like it had betrayed her. I watched from the hallway as he crouched beside it, flashlight in hand, studying something that didn't appear on any of his diagrams. Later that afternoon, I was called into a conference room and asked how many other systems I'd modified. I answered plainly. The crash cart, 4 backup power circuits, 2 stairwell emergency lights, and the central oxygen shut-off relay. I wasn't trying to brag. They asked, and I told the truth. The man blinked, like I'd just told him the hospital ran on duct tape and instinct. I handed him a folder. Inside were printed maps, handwritten checklists, and my original sketches for the color-coded code response charts. They'd been scrubbed from the walls a month earlier to make room for Brad's sleek QR protocol posters. He flipped through each page slower with every turn. I could tell when he hit the notes from the pandemic years. I'd kept track of every time we were short-staffed, when we had to double up oxygen tanks, when we rerouted PPE from pediatric to surgical, because it was all we had. It wasn't a logbook. It was memory organized and archived. He looked up and asked why none of it was digitized. I told him because systems fail and ink doesn't forget. I said that to his face. He didn't argue. He didn't, just nodded and left the room carrying 20 years' worth of proof that progress doesn't always mean improvement. That evening, I got a call from the maintenance chief. He asked if I could send him a copy of the stairwell emergency light sequence. He'd tried to override it using the new control panel and triggered a lockdown protocol. I told him it was in the blue folder marked Lighting Failover V2. Then I sat down and added one more note to the binder. The system wasn't something I had to build. No one asked me to. But after the second time the power flickered during a code, I knew we needed a backup. After the third time a nurse got locked out of a cart because of badge sync errors, I stopped asking for permission and started wiring in manual options. Every fix, every patch, every handwritten label, they weren't leftovers from the past. They were anchors. And when the storm hit, it wasn't the new tech that kept the place standing. It was the paper, the pen, and the woman who still knew where everything connected. They called it a debrief, but everyone in the room knew what it was. A cleanup, a soft apology wrapped in corporate vocabulary and performance evaluations. I walked in 15 minutes early and waited with my binder on the table unopened. Brad was already seated tapping at his laptop like he was writing the next great healthcare revolution. Across from him sat the hospital administrator, a woman named Corinne, who once gave me a 10-year pin and forgot my name 2 weeks later. There were 2 others, both in suits, both silent. Corinne started with a smile that felt like a mask glued on too tightly. She thanked me for my swift action during the incident. She said the hospital valued legacy expertise and institutional insight. I nodded once and said nothing. Brad took over. He said the recent situation revealed gaps in system integration and that the team recognized the need for hybrid transition protocols. He used the word partnership 4 times in 2 minutes. I waited for him to say what he really meant. Finally, Corinne leaned in and asked if I'd be open to consulting on a short-term basis, just to help them bridge the gap while they reevaluate the system design. She said I'd be compensated, of course, and that my input would be central moving forward. I looked at the proposal she slid across the table. Neatly printed, flexible hours, advisory role, no title, no authority, Just the privilege of cleaning up after a storm I warned them was coming. I pushed the paper back and told them I appreciated the offer. I also told them that offering me a bucket after ignoring the flood isn't a solution. It's a photo op. Corinne blinked. Brad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. I said the systems I built weren't meant to last forever. They were meant to last until someone better came along. Not flashier, not younger. Better. Someone who understood why the wires ran the way they did. Someone who didn't see color codes as clutter. Brad tried to say the team had been under pressure to modernize. I told him modern isn't a synonym for useful. I told him failure doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just flickers, like a light you didn't realize had gone out until you're standing in the dark. There was silence then. Not awkward. Final. Like a door had closed somewhere in the building and no one had a key. I stood, picked up my binder and thanked them for the meeting. Corinne asked if I'd reconsider. I smiled and said I already had. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drop a threat. I just walked out with the calm of someone who no longer needed permission to be right. Outside, the sun hit the parking lot in that harsh afternoon way that makes everything look honest. I sat in my car for a moment, listening to nothing. Then I started the engine and drove away. Not out of anger, but out of certainty. They wanted to patch the holes with the very thing they had thrown out. But some damage doesn't get undone. Some lessons stay written on the walls long after the name tags are gone. And I didn't need to rewrite the system. I'd already proved it worked. I started at the community health clinic 2 weeks later. No fanfare, no contract ceremony, just a warm smile from the director and a set of keys with my name on the tag. The building was smaller, the equipment older, but the air felt lighter. Here, no one asked for dashboards. No one tracked productivity with heat maps or tried to replace instinct with algorithms. They cared about people. When a patient cried, someone sat beside them. When a nurse had a question, she wasn't afraid to ask it twice. I helped set up an emergency shelf behind the triage desk, labeled everything in marker. No digital locks, no badge verification, just simple, smart systems that worked. The kind I used to fight for when no one listened. At first, I didn't check back on the hospital. I figured if they wanted to burn the manual, let them sit in the smoke. But curiosity has its way of knocking. One afternoon, a former colleague emailed me. She didn't say much, just a screenshot of an internal bulletin. The hospital had lost a major contract with one of its insurance partners. The report cited repeated compliance delays, failure to meet emergency response standards, and loss of credentialed oversight. Translation: no one knew how to run the place anymore. Brad had been reassigned. The email used the phrase lateral transition. Last I heard, he was put in charge of community outreach, which sounded more like exile than promotion. Someone else had taken over emergency systems, but most of my protocols were unrecoverable. The backup drives hadn't been maintained. No one could find the original paper flowcharts. That same week, the local paper ran a short piece on staffing shortages and rising patient complaints. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet unraveling. A slow consequence is finally catching up. I read it while sipping coffee in the clinic break room. No bitterness, no gloating, just the quiet knowledge that sometimes walking away is the only way to be heard. The staff here asked me to train new hires on emergency flow. I printed out a copy of the old triage chart, the same one they once called a relic, taped it to the wall with blue painter's tape. A young nurse asked if it came from a manual. I smiled and told her not exactly. We ran a drill the following Monday. Everything went smoothly, clear calls, right draws, no fumbling for logins, just respond, pure and human. Afterwards, someone said it felt calm, like the system knew what it was doing. I didn't tell them the system used to live in a basement binder and muscle memory. I go home earlier now. I sleep better. The weight I used to carry doesn't follow me out of work anymore. And every now and then, when I pass by the old hospital, I don't turn my head. I don't need to. I know what's happening behind those windows. They built their tower on polished glass and forgot who laid the bricks. I left the manual. They burned it. And now they're writing new ones with shaking hands. Meanwhile, mine are steady, ready for whatever comes next. Some mornings, I still wake up before sunrise like I'm heading in for the first shift. Old habits, maybe. Or maybe it's just the part of me that never stopped listening for alarms, even in silence. I sit by the window with my coffee, watching the street come to life. There's a calm to it now. No emails waiting, no charts to fix. Just the knowledge that I gave more than enough. The system I built doesn't carry my name anymore. It's been rewritten, rebranded, and spun into something new. But under every line of code, behind every drawer and relay, there's a trace of me they can't erase. They think systems are just wires and charts. But a real system remembers. It remembers who held the line when everything else fell apart. Who stayed late when the power flickered and protocols failed. People ask if I miss it. The rush, the wait, the constant noise. I don't. What I miss is the knowing, the certainty that when something broke, I had the tools and the trust to fix it. Now I find that same trust in smaller places, in the way a new nurse takes notes during orientation, in the steady breath of a patient who never knew how close things came to chaos. That's the part no spreadsheet captures. Sometimes when I pass by the old hospital, I glance up at the windows. They still shine, still look polished from the outside. But I know which ones used to jam, which rooms echo differently when it rains. There's a kind of peace in being forgotten when you know what they lost. Not in a cruel way, not with anger, just quiet understanding. Some lessons don't need to be retaught. They just wait. I didn't leave with a trophy. I left with everything that mattered. Integrity, memory, the calm of someone who doesn't need applause to know her worth. In the break room of the clinic, I keep a sticky note on my locker. 5 words written in block letters. No one ever asked what it means. But every time I open that door, I read it once more. I was the code.